From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Granosky. So glad to be with you live, coming to you from the heart of Central Florida, where we're going to do radio, podcast, and video stream all in one. And we have an international audience growing daily because liberty and the truth does not have any borders. It is something that is universal. And we are excited to present that message today based on personhood, based on hope, based on skin in the game, based on nonviolence. Those are the things that we believe in and we fight for and we want to stand up for on this show. And so we'll look at news stories together with that in mind as the principles that we are looking to promote and pursue. Meanwhile, we have a society that is basically being throttled by an old archaic notion called globalism. And I was thinking about that it feels as if the best way to describe how it feels the whole world over right now, it feels like a giant global case of claustrophobia, a feeling of being confined in a space from which you cannot escape. That's what this asinine, Luddite, anti-science approach to coronavirus amounts to. It's a feeling if when they get in, when it sinks in, that negative feeling, it feels like claustrophobia. It feels like the whole world is going through a very backwards approach to dealing with health. They talk health in the TV party. And they talk a big game about doing anything they can to prevent just one death. And yet they don't even speak a word about how foundational nutrition, diet, and lifestyle has as a factor for whether you will have a lethal experience with coronavirus. Think about that for a moment. Not even a peep do you hear a word. In fact, you hear the opposite. You hear embracing a failed crony capitalist designed food pyramid of misinformation, which is what sickened us to the point where so many people who are aging are more prone to having horrible experiences with this new virus. Most likely something that came out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology that Dr. Fauci funded with your money. So even though the State Department said, don't do that, don't fund Wuhan Institute of Virology, they don't have the best protocols in place, but ignorant bureaucracy always seems to prevail, and therefore we have what we have today. Most likely that is where the outbreak happened in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and yet nobody is talking about the foundational role of nutrition and lifestyle, things like that, as the cornerstone for how we should approach dealing with this virus. I was talking to somebody overseas today who listens to the program, and in their country, they're on lockdown again. They're not allowed to go out in the park without a mask. Imagine that. Not allowed to go out in the park to breathe in fresh air. If they are caught outside in a park without a mask, they can get fined. They can get fined for that. But they won't fine you for eating linoleic acid, omega-6 seed oil, garbage, industrial slop. If they catch you with a bag of potato chips fried in canola oil or soybean oil, they won't fine you for that, even though that accumulating in your body is at a foundational level for having us with this virus. For a lot of people, it's correlated with the experiences of difficulty overcoming this virus without a lot of severe problems. They won't fine you for that, you know. But they will fine you in this country. I'm talking about a country overseas if you're caught outside in a nature park without a mask. What happened to this world where so many Luddites, so many people who hate science have gobbled up and tried to define what is science? What happened to a world in which the people who are most cruel seem to be the ones who are monopolizing what is considered to be care? What happened to a world in which those who support the most unhealthy foods have become the standard bearers of what is considered health and what is considered health care? What has happened to this world? It feels like claustrophobia. It feels like the whole world is under a clampdown by the most ignorant people one could imagine, who tell us to eat linoleic acid, omega-6. They tell us to eat corn syrup. They tell us to stay away from the sun. They tell us to stay away from normal social interactions. They tell us that basically we don't even have an immune system except for whatever giant corporations provide for us, as if that's how the human civilizations, that's how the human race, that's how the human species got to where it is today. Patented drugs. That was the only way we were able to survive. They have tried to create a forgetfulness where we're supposed to forget that the companies that are supposed to be our saviors now, that we're not allowed to question, that Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and so forth are constantly doing the bidding for. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, whoever, that these companies have a long, long history of mischief that CNN and New York Times and ABC and CBS and NBC have reported on. They just want us to forget it, like we're in some kind of television show, that we can just move on to whatever the next episode is, and a character that was written as a villain one episode is now brought back as a hero without any good story arc explanation as to how that exactly should be received and accepted as legit in terms of their character transformation. Anybody who studies any stories would know that the myths that the media tries to present to us today are lacking any credibility. That if this was a plot, we'd say this is a ridiculous, asinine, idiotic plot. And yet that's the script that so many groupthink-owned media outlets seem to be singing from every day. Eat your industrial seed oil laced foods. Eat your corn syrup. Put your mask on if you're 2 years old and outside. Unless you get your pharmaceutical giant Pfizer or Moderna or Johnson & Johnson drug, then you can take your mask off. Don't ever dissent. This is not science. This is a ridiculous, demented religion called scientism, in which you have the form and fashion of science, but none of the spirit, none of the integrity, none of the data to support such outlandish, monopolistic claims on the truth. And so the world is facing quite an ordeal. But at the same time, liberty continues to grow. Wisdom and intelligence continues to grow. Decentralized media voices and technology continues to develop. And people are hungry for freedom. But freedom is not the first thing on the minds of those who are caught up in the crowd. Those who are caught up in the crowd are almost possessed by a frequency of thought. A frequency of thought that kind of basically warps our conscience and makes us go along to get along. And that crowd spirit does no one any favors except those who profit from having people think like sheep. We are human beings. We are not meant to be somebody's cattle. We are not meant to be captured products. And yet the whole world history has shown that people have always tried to herd people into pens, human pens. Ancient societies all over the globe tried to make human beings become their serfs, to do what was convenient for those who saw them as their property. This is an old story. It's the story that many of our ancestors, in fact, all of our ancestors, have had to endure through the world history. A story of tyrants and people who disrespect human beings, trying to come up with more and more creative ways as to why they have a right to treat you like cattle. This is nothing new. This folks who are trying to come up with more reasons to tax and regulate and control and censor and prod you around and move you left and right and gaslight you, inundate you with demoralizing groupthink nonsense. This is nothing new. Welcome to human history. Welcome to human history. Welcome to the normal state of affairs for much of human existence. It is a sad but also hopeful story because someone entered into history who's got their number. Someone entered into history has the number for all the tyrants and all the nations and the kings of the earth. They lined up against him when he came into history. And they tried to defeat what he was doing. But in their attempt to defeat him, he defeated them. And that person is moving in history and unfolding his plan. The personhood revolution. That story of the liberation of the human person away from the collective mob is the story that we are a part of today. It is a story that transcends petty tribalism, artificial racial divides, and all the nonsense that the wannabe tyrants of our time would throw at us. It is a story that will defeat all of these failed ideological myths that are constructed in real time to make us doubt our own immune systems, to make us doubt our own families, to make us doubt logic, to make us doubt love. These fools that run these foundations of ignorance, these TV stations that are failing in their ratings, that are dropping like rocks, like the Oscars and all these failed TV stations that only preach to an ever-shrinking audience who are also waking up slowly away from the dogmatism of hate. These old, outdated ideas that they promulgate are going to fail because the personhood revolution, inaugurated over 2,000 years ago, continues to shake the foundations of liars and wannabe tyrants. And it presents us with a new opportunity to build a society of love, forgiveness, grace, mercy, and self-sacrifice rather than sacrifice of another. Right now, the world is being told that the only way to have justice is to follow the failed ideas of French postmodernists, what they call critical theory. You've heard about it. It is a hateful, reactionary, fascist-aligned concept, a cheap, wannabe, microwaved imitation of the personhood revolution of Jesus. And what it wants to do is put us all into collective groups, to tribes, into tribes. And I thought about it, and I thought, where else do we hear about tribes and racial groups? Oh, that's prison. In prison, you hear about people going back into a more primitive state of aligning themselves with racial tribes. There's no personhood in prison. You pick a tribe based on some kind of identity group. That sounds exactly what critical theory is all about. It is French postmodern brats trying to justify why we should have a society just like prisons do, where we're all going to identify each other based on tribal identity. Well, that will fail because Jesus has come to set captives free. And those captives are the physical captives of tyrannical, outdated laws, as well as captives of failed mental prisons, like these latest ideologies, the flavor of the month being critical theory. I'm David Gronowski. We'll take a break and return in just a moment on A Neighbor's Choice. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved two people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com. Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida. Or go to whiteoakpastures.com and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender. Neighbor's Choice returns. David Gronowski here, your host, as we continue live on radio, video stream, podcast. Looking at the news, I wanted to share this story that we saw from a listener who I named Leonardo, and he says, David, I've been enjoying your podcast and I'm especially grateful for the information you share regarding seed oils. While I was trying to find more info on the subject, I came across this recent report describing epoxides of linoleic acid being implicated as biomarkers indicating severity of COVID infections. And it's a link to Frontiers in Medicine, a peer-reviewed journal where this is found. And he sent that after hearing Tucker Goodrich and I on the show yesterday, as we talked about seed oils, as we do, and how important they are for understanding our health predicament that we're in today. And that was an awesome link. We've had Frontiers in Medicine. We've reported on other things that they've published. And it's just fascinating stuff to see what's coming out in the science. And, Tucker Goodrich wrote about this in June of last year. He said, since we know that diet modulates fatty acid composition of lung tissue, and he cites the sources, it is plausible that this increased substrate of leukotoxin production directly affects COVID-19 disease severity in the lung, but this remains to be shown outside the indication given. And he said, this is the mechanism I described in that post. The very mechanism that now is talked about in this Frontiers in Physiology peer-reviewed paper, in which these leukotoxins, that are proliferate in the body are linked to the severity of this COVID disease. Exactly what we've been talking about why you need to avoid these things. Why doesn't NBC tell you this? Why doesn't maybe they're owned by the same company, investors that own the companies that sell industrial oils. Is it that simple? The same investment companies that own these extremely lucrative, extremely environmentally devastating industrial seed oils, maybe they have a stake in some of these media companies too, right? As Sir Owen talked about on our show earlier this week, you got like BlackRock and Vanguard and just a handful of companies that have trillions of dollars in assets in these companies, these major media companies, and these major pharmaceutical companies and the major food companies. So it's nice, one little happy family. But the problem is spreading a lot of ignorance, pseudoscience, misinformation, and ultimately pain to billions of families. And that's sad. That doesn't have to be. Why do human beings have to be so greedy and so selfish that they would rather profit for themselves by keeping people ignorant and eating stuff that makes them sick, like these seed oils? And it's just amazing to see it. And that pathway of consuming these seed oils is linked to the risk of severe COVID-19, of accumulating these things in your body. That's why elderly people who've been eating them the longest, they've bioaccumulated the most, more than anybody else. And you'd think if these guys had any decency in them, they'd just report the science so we can help people get off these things, get this stuff out of their body. It takes years to get it completely gone, but just dramatically cutting these things out completely, including the chicken and pork that they're in, would do a huge, big benefit for people who are immunocompromised. Come on now, let's get this message out there. A Neighbor's Choice will continue in just a moment with State Representative Anthony Sabatini.
There is all kinds of lunacy going on.
Yes.
The madness of 2020.
No.
Weekdays 11 to 2.
I'm just so fed up with these Democrats. It's unbelievable.
Get it straight from Chris Plant.
They're so hypocritical. It makes me sick.
It's the Chris Plant Show.
This has just got me going off.
And the left is waging war against the police in the United States.
Telling it like it is.
You should be thanked profusely for getting to the point.
You're a voice of reason in the sea of idiots.
The Chris Plant Show. Weekdays 11 to 2. News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Houston police say while responding to a call to investigate a possible kidnapping case at a home, they discovered dozens of people and were executing a search warrant. Darren Edwards is Assistant Chief of Houston Police Homeland Security Command. He says that now turned into a human smuggling investigation. When they got to the house, they realized there were over 90 people inside. Edwards says they're all adults, no children. Many of them are showing COVID symptoms and are being tested. President Biden taking his infrastructure Plan on the road to Pennsylvania today, highlighting rail travel, and $80 billion, he says, is earmarked to expand and repair Amtrak. He says the $2 trillion plan, along with other economic proposals, will create more jobs. The Israeli consulate in New York say 4 Americans are among the 45 dead confirmed in the stampede in northern Israel during a religious festival. One rabbi confirming to ABC News his nephew, Donnie Morris of New York, is one of the American victims. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm David Gronowski, and we've been talking about what social media does to completely distort information. They are anti-science, they're anti-scientific discourse, they're even against anti-war messages. We had a story with BringOurTroopsHome.us where Sergeant Dan McKnight was not able to buy ads promoting a bipartisan commemoration of the death of General Smedley Butler, where they went to his graveside to talk about the monumental ideas he put forward in the book War is a Racket. And YouTube, as bigoted as they must be, I guess, they denied them the ability to promote that video. They didn't want to hear about war is a racket. And so they're editorial content publishers. That's what they do. And they just get to be protected from the rules that everybody else has to abide by. That's crony capitalism. And joining me now is Florida Representative Anthony Sabatini to talk about this issue. How you doing?
Never been better, David. How are you?
I'm doing great. And I wanted to have you on because there's big news in Florida, where Florida continues to be kind of a leader in a lot of these different debates going on in the states about how to deal with different issues like the big tech social media censorship. And there's been a new bill that passed, and I saw that you had tweeted out about how you were happy to have supported it. You have been talking about the need to have a bill like this for some time. You were concerned that there was going to be a lot of watering down that would kind of bias other states who would say, okay, we'll do a watered down bill. How did it all shake out?
We went into session. I went into session with somewhat pessimistic because I knew we passed some kind of big tech censorship legislation, but I didn't have a good feeling that it was going to be as strong as it needed to be. As strong as it needed to be to stop the election interference and just the blatant censorship that these 5 big tech companies have engaged in. Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Google, and Apple. And what we found is that, despite lobbyists and some of the weaker Republicans trying to water down the bill, we still ended up with a decent product. I filed a bill that was very strong that would have just straight up banned any kind of deplatforming. Unfortunately, that bill didn't make it all the way through, but a slightly weaker version did, which basically makes these companies have to post and then be liable for, if they break, but they have to post their standards for whether they can censor or deplatform a person, and essentially doesn't let them do it to anyone who's a political candidate. So if, like a Donald Trump, for example, if he's running for office or in office, they can't be deplatformed. And, journalists too. It has a carve out for journalists. So if you're a journalistic enterprise, you're not allowed to be deplatformed. There's some pretty strong language in there. I think it needs to be a little stronger, but the fact that we're the first state in the nation to pass this thing and that these big tech companies couldn't lobby their way out of it, is pretty interesting. So we'll see what happens.
Now, if does this have any retroactive effect for, things like you said, media outlets? I'm thinking of Project Veritas. They've been, I believe, deleted from Twitter. And then you've got people like, Donald Trump, of course, deleted from these platforms. Does this have any retroactive effect or no?
That's the biggest, I would say, the 2 or 3 biggest problems with the bill. I would say the non-retroactivity is the single biggest one. I said from the beginning, this bill needs to cure two things. It needs to make it that you can't keep banned a person like Donald Trump, the leader of the Republican Party, the voice of half the country, off Twitter. This bill needs to fix that. It also needs to make it that a guy like James O'Keefe can't be kept off Twitter. It made some headway on the James O'Keefe situation, but it did not address candidates who had been banned in the past. So it's been a failure in that regard. But the fact that we went from zero to something is something has to be said for that. So once again, we gotta fix it next year. We gotta make it better next year. But I'm just glad they're able to get something. I was afraid they wouldn't be able to get anything simply because the weakness you see in a lot of these rhino legislators.
So for folks at home who have no idea what this is all about, what does this bill do specifically? What are the changes that this bill brings to the table, just for summary?
So the first thing that these companies have to do, and we'll be the first government in the country that they have to do this to, they have to post all of the regulations of what they consider to be, and they have to be specific about it, the standards for which a person could be banned or deplatformed or whatever. If they do not do that, then they can be fined $250,000. They're basically be punished just for that alone. Second, in addition to that, if they then ban somebody from the internet after they post those things, then they can be sued for $250,000 a day, every single day. It has to give notice. It won't allow them to change these standards, so they can't just be like, oh, well, we changed our standards today, and now all these other people are going to be kicked off, et cetera. Allows the attorney general to sue them, if they break these things too. And also has an antitrust part. So, for example, Apple, which tried to kick off Parler, it eliminated them from the servers when they decided that they weren't going to host Parler anymore. They could be broken up in an antitrust action, or at least be sued and potentially broken up if they ever did something like that again.
So
they'll be investigated for kicking Parler off the servers too.
So is there any indication in this effort that more is going to come in the next session, or is this they're going to try to make this all they want to do and move on?
I don't know. We don't know. It all depends on the citizenry. If the citizens sit back and do nothing, then the politicians aren't going to do any more. But what I'm hoping is that people see this bill and go, well, I'm glad something was done, but this doesn't go far enough, and now we're demanding it. And then that pent-up demand and rage results in fearful politicians who do the right thing and pass a full-fledged bill. So that's what I'm hoping translates. If not, if the voter apathy just amounts to people doing nothing, then I don't think you're going to see any improvement on the bill. We'll see. In
previous interviews, I've heard you say that you were concerned about Facebook and Google lobbying up, buying off all the best lobbyists in Tallahassee. Is that what panned out here? Is that what watered down the bill, or do you think it didn't come to a head like that yet?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have very weak legislative leadership, and they were lobbied very hard on this bill, and the bill didn't go nearly far enough. Like I said, you can't knock the legislature entirely. There's 50 states, and only one state in the entire country has done anything on big tech censorship. It's at least made these companies accountable. It made them basically have to comply with Florida law and be potentially punished literally millions of dollars if they break Florida law. Right. So that something has to be said there. I don't know if any country in the world other than Poland has done anything. So that's pretty cool.
Right.
But at the same time, it doesn't come close to where we need to be in order to stop this very serious election interference.
Right. Now, what about this other big vote that's got a lot of attention is the vote to ban vaccine passports in Florida. The bill passed 76-40. What's that entail for folks who are unfamiliar?
Well, that was a pretty good bill. We're the first state in the nation to literally ban vaccine passports. The governor is planning to sign that into law very soon. And what that makes is that any business that comes within the stream of commerce, so any airline, cruise ship, company, restaurant, whatever, any kind of company whatsoever that wants to operate in Florida, you cannot deny a person any good or service if they don't prove that to you that they have vaccines. So if Walmart, Walmart wouldn't do, but if Disney, for example, a woke liberal corporate company like Disney tried to say, well, you can come to our parks if you're vaccinated, or, if not, you can't come. That sort of behavior would be prohibited under the law, and they would actually be eligible to be sued and fined or potentially shut down if they did it. So that's pretty cool. Doesn't go as far as I wanted it to. Once again, they never really do. I wanted it to include employee protections that says you cannot be fired if you refuse to be vaccinated. So if Disney says everybody who works here has to be vaccinated or you'll be fired, well, then unfortunately the bill didn't speak to that.
Wow. Well, that sounds like good news as well. Another thing that you reported on Twitter, you said proud to vote for legislation today that prevents state tax dollars from going to the NCAA or any other business organization that attempts to boycott the state. And that bill passed as well. So that's another positive story for a lot of folks, right?
Yeah, that's huge. So all these industries that try to boycott the state based on our legislative decisions. So if we pass a bill to protect women's sports and they say, okay, well, in that case, we're not going to host any tournaments in Florida, blah, blah, blah. If they're explicit about it, then they will actually not be able to receive any state money. What does that mean? That means that like University of Florida, Florida State University, all these colleges, universities, or any other kind of government entity that pays money to be a member of the NCAA or be affiliated with them or sponsor them, they would no longer be able to do that. So the NCAA is literally completely choked off, and any other big company would be too. So Florida being the third largest state in the nation, that's a really serious maneuver. And, it's really welcome news. It was probably one of the more positive, ballsy policy developments I saw coming out of the state legislature this year. I was obviously proud to support it.
And is there any chance for the Defend the Guard Act to pass this year? That was something that we've talked about a lot on this show, about bringing the National Guard in Florida home from these undeclared regime change, nation building projects.
Nope, unfortunately not. Like I mentioned, you got a lot of rhinos, a lot of weak Republican moderates in the legislature. In fact, the bills we just spoke about, I'd like to say that the reason they even got moving and had the push and the power behind them to get them to where they were, even though they weren't perfect, they're still good bills overall. It was really because of the governor, the conservative governor we had, DeSantis, who doesn't care and is willing to fight those big fights, unlike a lot of the sort of weaker, more moderate legislative leaders. And so the Defend the Guard Act, unless you're going to get Governor buy-in, that bill's not going to move because there's only a very small group of us that even supported it as a bill. The Florida Senate is so weak and cowardly, they couldn't even find one senator to actually file the bill. So the bill only got filed in the Florida House. That's how bad our Florida Senate is. They're basically Democrats. They're arm twisting the passing good policy. No good policy ever comes out of that body. It's very liberal. But we got to file it in the House. We got the conversation going. We'll be filing it again next year. And hopefully somebody, shakes off their cowardice in the Florida Senate and actually stands up and files this good policy, which is both, abides by the Constitution. I'm sure your listeners and viewers know. But for those who don't, this is a very common sense bill that says the federal Congress is going to pull the National Guard troops out of these states and deploy them overseas. They should at least abide by the Constitution and declare an act of war prior to sending them downrange. Because right now, as many people know, there's all these so-called police actions, or not even, these days don't even do police actions. They just have troops stationed all around the world for no cause whatsoever, other than just to be the global police. And so this bill would make them abide by the Constitution, declare war before they took Florida's National Guard troops away.
Wow.
Just pure common sense. And we'll file it again next year.
Yeah, I hope it gets some traction there. We'll have to see what we can do to get more public support behind that. I want to close out by getting an update on, I know you've announced that you're running for U.S. Congress, and that's kind of bittersweet because, as you just mentioned, there's very, very few people who are excited about liberty in the Florida state legislature, right? But you have a desire to go fight the swamp up in D.C. So what's the latest going on in your race for U.S. Congress?
Well, it's going swimmingly. You know, Florida's getting, as we expected, one large congressional seat right here in the central Florida area, Polk County, Osceola, West Orange, Lake, all along the I-4 corridor, one of the fastest growing place in Florida. And I'll be running for it. I raised $250,000 in our first 45 days. I'm in front place, and I think we'll win it. You know, voters are tired of the fakes, the frauds, the Republicans that say they're going to do something, come in office, and then just schmooze and don't get anything done and just pass liberal, watered down, weak legislation day after day. And so, I have a proven conservative record, which I think a lot of voters in Central Florida have been paying attention to. And so I expect to win this thing.
Yeah, it seems like for so long, Republicans and conservatives, I call them their team that the Harlem Globetrotters play. You know what I mean? They're just designed to get dunked on in real spectacular fashion while they make out transactional victories for the people that put them in office who happen to be the crony capitalists. So one team, the left, seems to have a animating vision that just animates everything they think about and dream about and hope for. And the other team is just a sorry bunch of used car salesmen, unfortunately, that end up spending so much of their time just making the other team look really good. You know what I mean?
I think that's a pretty accurate depiction.
Well, hopefully you can really shake things up in Congress, in U.S. Congress, as you have been so effective in doing here in the state legislature. So, Anthony Sabatini, where can people continue to follow what you've got going on?
Well, I definitely encourage them to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, Anthony Sabatini, Sabatini. Check me out. Check out the website, SabatiniForCongress.com, and I'll keep your people updated on the legislation we're working on in Florida, and also all the other political affairs that are happening at the federal and the local government level. You know, where there's a fight for liberty, I'm there, and I'm keeping people informed of what's going on. So follow me on social media.
Very good. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, David. Take care.
A Neighbor's Choice will continue in just a moment.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals, join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now.
NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski here. We're live. Let's look at some of the comments that we have on our YouTube and Facebook video streams. We see a story, a comment from Ignacio. He says, CNN ran another story about Matt. I guess he's referring to Matt Gaetz, perhaps, without verifying the source. They cited an article written by another publication, which has also not verified the source. Now they have enough for a FISA warrant. And he says also stellar was Joy Behar on The View, black-splaining racism to Senator Tim Scott. And another person alleging Scott was only picked because he is black. That's very disrespectful, but expected from, bullies who like to be cruel. The only radical political idea in human history is pre-individual rights and the liberty to exercise them. Another commenter says, Dr. Pritchard says, excellent analysis and such a unique perspective. All I can say is keep it up. Thank you. Adam on Facebook says, great job. Another commenter says, in Canada Stan, we are afraid of being afraid. I don't know what's going on over in Canada. They keep sending police to the Polish man's church. I wonder what's going to happen with that. He's grew up behind the Iron Curtain in Poland, and he doesn't want to deal with the nonsense, the nasty, hateful, insane thinking. If these people, they want to shut down a church, but they can't tell you to stop the seed oils, which the science, as we just showed, shows that these leukotoxins that accumulate in the body from linoleic acid. They won't tell you to stop the vegetable oils, the seed oils that have this linoleic acid. But they'll stop a church from having a church service because that'll hurt the public. This is so stupid. Guys, wake up. This is so dumb. This isn't about partisanship. This is common sense. That's stupid as can be. To say that, we're going to stop a church from having Passover service, but we won't bother to tell folks to put down the linoleic acid, which is in the vegetable oil, soybean oil, canola oil, peanut oil, corn oil, all those different nuts and seed oils. Stay away from them. This is disgusting that they can't even tell people. They're too busy shutting down churches and fining people for not wearing a mask in a park to tell people to do something that is much more effective for healthy outcomes for everybody. Not just for this virus, but for all the chronic illnesses that are associated with massive consumption of these vegetable oils that make you hungry for carbs and sugar. Mary comments, says Central Florida here in response to our guest, Anthony Sabatini, who's running for U.S. Congress in Central Florida. Ivy says, check his Facebook page, referring to Anthony Sabatini, very outspoken and for the people, not worried about virtue signaling to Dems. I live in Tallahassee, a liberal locked up city, unfortunately, but if he were running here in our district, he would definitely have all my support. Proud to have him in Florida. But this is something that goes beyond partisanship. At some point, people have to wake up from ignorance. Right? The anti-science ignorance that's on display from the corporate press, the TV party, as I call them. The ignorance that they continue to peddle is breathtaking. You read this story in Frontiers in Physiology, this science paper, and it's just, it makes a strong case for removing these seed oils from our
life. And it's just heartbreaking that these people are so busy being ignorant that they don't want to study the science and get on board with science. It says the finding raises the possibility that amelioration of COVID-19 symptoms may be achieved in part by reduction of omega-6 rich diet or an enhanced omega-3 fatty acid intake in patients hospitalized for COVID-19. Linoleic at quite low levels is an essential, let's talk about linoleic acid, is an essential fatty acid for maintenance of skin barrier function. Yet an earlier study in 1958 showed that even with no dietary fat intake, 2% of energy from linoleic was enough to maintain skin barrier function. Therefore, reducing linoleic acid intake or substituting it with anti-inflammatory lipids, such as omega-3 rich fish oil, is unlikely to have a deleterious effect on the long-term health. Indeed, this approach is currently being evaluated through intravenous omega-3 administration in COVID-19 hospitalized patients in the COVID omega-F trial. Further benefits from reducing omega-6 fatty acid intake germane to the COVID omega-F trial show increased bioavailability of omega-3 fatty acids with reduced linoleic acid consumption. So you want to get this stuff out of your body. That's the science. We've been telling you this. Tucker Goodrich wrote about this last year. Not only is it linked to aging dysfunctional cells called senescent cells, which, remember, we talked about this with Dr. Michael Lasanti from the University of Salford, the chair of translational medicine there, who talked about this at the very beginning of the outbreak on our show, exclusively on A Neighbor's Choice, and then we had him go, we got the message out to other talking about ACE2, which is the senescent cell site that seems to be the doorway for causing all kinds of cytokine storms, which is the inflammatory overreaction that ends up hurting people with COVID. You know, it's just bizarre that there is such a thick wall of ignorance, but it's not surprising, right? I am the guy that talks about mimetic theory. I'm the one that talks about the crowd. And the crowd is untruth. The crowd is where ignorance breeds and festers and warps our ability to move forward into a better direction. That's the reality. To win a crowd is no art, for that only untruth is needed, nonsense and a little knowledge of human passions. But no witness to the truth dares to get involved with the crowd. Soren Kierkegaard. Let's stay out of crowdthink. I'm David Gronowski. In a moment, we'll hear from Michael Rectenwald, the professor who takes on critical theory. We're going to have a full discussion with him in the next hour. We'll also talk about René Girard's mimetic theory. Don't miss it. Exciting stuff in just a moment. But for now, Godspeed.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
From ABC News, I'm Michelle Franzen. President Biden in Philadelphia celebrating Amtrak's 50 years of service and touting his $2 trillion infrastructure bill. The president spending more than 3 decades commuting by rail as a senator.
I've been riding an Amtrak for almost as long as there's been an Amtrak. I've come to see that Amtrak doesn't just carry us from one place to another. It opens up enormous possibilities. And especially now, it makes it possible to build an economy of the future and one that we need.
Vice President Kamala Harris also on the move, traveling to Ohio and Kentucky to build support for the infrastructure and economic recovery plans. A second U.S. flight packed with critical supplies, including oxygen, has arrived in India. New daily infections topped 380,000, new record. The U.S. also putting travel restrictions on flights.
It's going to be about another
President
5-6
Biden
minutes. I just want to go ahead and get you on there, and that way you could
Prime Minister
walk away
deadly
and you're not feeling rushed
festival.
or anything.
45 people confirmed dead, including 4 Americans. The Pentagon announcing changes in border wall funding.
President Biden will return to the Pentagon more than $17 billion President Trump took without congressional approval to build the Mexican border wall. He will also cancel all related construction contracts. Congress had originally approved that money for hundreds of military schools, warehouses, and other military construction projects here and abroad.
In Southern California, the world's most iconic theme park reopened today for the first time since the pandemic lockdowns.
As many people have been entering Disneyland, they've started crying, tears of joy that they're back inside after a year away that has changed so many lives. These women crying as they walk down Main Street.
Just the memories growing up, always, coming to Disneyland. It just brings you back so much memories coming back.
Disney is a parent company of ABC News.
ABC's Alex Stone reporting. This is ABC News.
Paid for by government.com.
Have you heard? A recent stash of 1893 $10 gold Liberty coins has been found. These gorgeous 1893p gold coins are as bright and shiny as the day they were struck, and less than 25 of these gold coins are available. Coin experts are calling this gold find an incredible opportunity. Just call government.com at 1-800-333-2210, and you are guaranteed a mint condition 1893 $10 gold Liberty, struck at the iconic Philadelphia Mint, but with extremely limited availability. You must call now. These 1893 gold coins are still in uncirculated condition. That is 128 years of history you can hold in your hand. To learn more, call 1-800-333-2210. Call now and you'll receive a free American Coin Collector's Bonus Package of $40 value, free with every order. Call 1-800-333-2210 now to secure your 1893p Gold Liberty coins before they sell out. That's 1-800-333-2210.
8 former fraternity members facing charges in the alcohol-related death of a Bowling Green State University student. 20-year-old Stone Foltz was attending a pledge party for Pi Kappa Alpha in March, where prosecutors say he was told to drink a full bottle of alcohol. Sherry Foltz, Stone's mother, wants universities to enforce zero tolerance towards hazing.
It's a parent's worst nightmare. We don't want any parent to have to go through what we've been living every single day since March 7th.
The suspects due in court May 19th. Apple, accused of violating EU antitrust laws.
European Union regulators accuse Apple of violating the bloc's antitrust laws. In Brussels, European Commission competition chief Marguerite Vestager.
Our preliminary conclusion is that Apple abused its dominant position for the distribution of music streaming apps through its store and distorted competition in the music streaming market.
Under EU competition law, companies can be fined up to 10% of their annual revenue for breaches, which in Apple's case could run into billions. Tom Rivers, ABC News at the Foreign Desk.
A court in Germany has ruled the country's climate law is insufficient. A judge ruled the country must update its climate law by the end of next year and will provide a plan on how it will bring carbon emissions down to almost zero by the year 2050. This is ABC News.
O'Reilly. Don't miss out on Clean Car Month at O'Reilly Auto Parts. If your car could use a spring cleaning, stop by for deals on everything you need to keep your car looking new, like Mother's California Gold Wash and Wax, just $4.99 for a 64-ounce bottle. That's a $6 savings. Visit the professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts today or O'ReillyAuto.com.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A neighbor's choice I'm your host, your neighbor, David Granosky. So glad to be back with you again for hour 2 of our broadcast. We're broadcasting live worldwide on our podcast video stream and our radio affiliate. So if you're listening here, particularly on our flagship station, WHBO News Talk Florida, welcome. Set the station here. Set it as your primary go-to station, 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern time, because that's where we're going to go through the news like nobody else does. You get informed better than any other program out there, because we're not getting into left versus right. Go get this person elected. That's superficial to us. We get into the heart of the matter, empowering you with take-home toolkits of information that you can use to advance your health and your family's well-being, your liberty, your peace. Alex Brinson on Twitter posted, a VAERS, the Federal Vaccine Side Effects Database, has updated for the week. Holy moly, it's now 118,000 plus COVID vaccine reports. That's up 32,000 in a week, a 35% rise. Before COVID, VAERS got that many reports in a year. Just how bad is the backlog? So, I mean, we report this stuff because so many media outlets don't. So we want to provide the full spectrum of information that's out there. That's on the government database itself, but that's not going to be reported by media outlets that are owned by the same companies that own the pharmaceutical companies. There's obviously a conflict of interest. Would you go to a Disney-owned outlet to hear criticism of the Mickey Mouse cartoon? No, of course not. It's stupid, right? That's very ignorant, and you'd have to have a deep, deep trust and abiding faith in crony capitalists to have that kind of mindset. Unfortunately, the left, the once noble left, who used to be very aggressive in keeping corporations accountable, they are doing the bidding of giant corporations by saying, no, you don't ever question, ever question anything that giant corporations tell you is good for you. There's just no place. They want you to believe that dissent is non-scientific. It's unscientific to have dissent or just have a healthy skepticism. Anytime somebody doesn't want to have legal skin in the game for a product they sell, you should obviously be entitled to have skepticism and say, you know what, I don't have to do what you tell me to do. If you're not willing to stand by your product, why do I have to put my skin in the game when you won't put your skin in the game? And these same companies, Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, we read the stories from years past on CNN and NBC and ABC and CBS reporting on criminal malfeasance that these companies have engaged in the past for other marketing of drugs. So why the hell are we supposed to forget that when these same media outlets now tell us that you have to do the product that the same companies that have had criminal malfeasance in the past and had to pay out billions of dollars in fines, now they're just squeaky clean, 100% infallible, take it to the bank? Give me a break. How dumb is that? Especially when these same media outlets were telling us if Donald Trump sped up the warp speed program for these vaccines like he did, you should be very skeptical of the drugs. That's what they were saying. They remember them saying that in the debates? Remember Kamala Harris saying, oh, I don't know if I'm going to take that vaccine if Donald Trump did it. Now they're telling you you're a bad person if you don't want to. How stupid do you have to be to buy this kind of, browbeating, gaslighting nonsense from corporations that are owned by the same investors that own the pharmaceutical companies? How dumb do they expect people to be? It's so embarrassing. So embarrassing. It's just pitiful. Well, we're going to change gears for a moment now and talk a little bit about philosophy. We're going to talk about culture, and we're going to talk about it in a way that is extremely relevant for our daily life. In the last year or so, Joe Biden, who was trained by KKK Robert Byrd, according to his VP and other segregationists, he has now been rebranded as a advocate of racial justice. Of course, that's nonsense. Of course, he continues to nation build and have imperial occupation of people of color around the world. The media loves to do that. They love promoting that perpetual occupation and regime change intervention into countries around the world that he does and that he continues to advance. But they want to rebrand him. And so they're trying to push that he is this advocate of racial justice and so forth and so on. By the way, at the same time, he's wanting to expand the war on drugs by, of course, banning menthol cigarettes because that won't lead to any violent outcomes. Look at what Eric Garner happened to him. He was choked out, right, because he was selling Lucy cigarettes, unlicensed cigarettes. And they said, oh, we're not going to go after the individuals who buy it, just the store owners. Well, what does that do? That creates a black market where someone like Eric Garner could sell menthol cigarettes on the corner and have the same violent outcome. And then if that happens because of Joe Biden's administration, he won't take the responsibility. He'll blame it on a scapegoat. He'll call it Whiteness did that. You see, he creates a menthol cigarette ban, and then somebody, just like Eric Garner, sells that. Okay, there's a margin now, because whenever you ban something that still has a demand, it creates some market demand pent up, which makes a margin go up. Profit margins go up because there's a shrinking supply, but there's still a strong demand. And so somebody like Eric Garner will go out and sell menthol cigarettes under Biden's ban, which will then put police who normally would not have any reason to mess with the person to go and deal with them. And then if there's a confrontation, they could die. And police could die, or the person who's selling the cigarette, like Eric Garner, could die. And that's on Joe Biden. That's on Kamala Harris and everybody else who pushes this ban. But what they do, like little bigots, like cruel little bigots, is they want to already have a scapegoat ready. And so they call it whiteness, which is something they get from critical theory, which is a French postmodern theory. It's very ridiculous that we're having these conversations right now, but this is where we're at, and we have to deal with the madness of our times. So joining me now is a person that we've had on the program before. He's a voice for understanding critical theory. He's the author of 11 books, including Thought Criminal, Beyond Woke. Michael Rectenwald, how you doing?
Great, David. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, yeah, I just wanted to set the conversation up here, and any thoughts that come to mind first?
Well, yeah, just this idea of using, the white scapegoat here in place of, his own culpability. This is typical for somebody like Biden or others who basically fob off their own guilt onto other people and scapegoat them. And this is really something that's very prevalent right now. And whiteness is this scapegoat, this abstraction that is supposedly has to be abolished in our society. Whiteness is this evil that must be extirpated from the social order. That's just, it's a strange amalgam from critical theory and critical race theory that has come down to us, and now it's sitting, it's being embodied in the presidency of the United States.
Right. And its whiteness is not necessarily skin tone, right? It's some kind of abstraction. It's not white people. It's some kind of entity, right?
Yeah, whiteness is this supposed systemic structuring of society that is based on white privilege, and that props up white privilege. And really, this white privilege doesn't really obtain for every white person, of course. This is what I argued in a recent argument, a recent essay called Vengeance and Sacrifice, Whiteness as Scapegoat. It really stands in for the elite who use the majority of white people as the scapegoat for their own crimes.
Right. And you get it, and we're going to get into your article for this hour, and it's called Vengeance and Sacrifice, Whiteness as Scapegoat in Critical Race Theory and Critical Whiteness Studies. And but basically, it's interesting because you pull from the work of Rene Girard, and I do that as well. And there's a lot of places to start with that. But I think, first of all, when you have a population that feels taken advantage of, which many Americans are being taken advantage of the system, Rene Girard says that rivals are much, much more likely to have conflict when they're internal, when they're closer to home rather than external, far out of your reach, right? And so it's very helpful for elites who live in very rich gated communities, or their president, like Joe Biden or whatever, they're very secluded away from the masses. And it's hard for the average person to feel like they can have rivalry in any satisfactory way with someone who's high up in a hierarchy like that. And so it's much easier to get them to turn their attention towards someone closer, like their neighbor, and say, hey, you know why? You know why someone got hurt because of Joe Biden's menthol cigarette ban? It's not the law that we created to create a lucrative new funnel for some crony that'll benefit from it. No, it's, see that guy over there? He's got different skin tone than you. Get him. That's the one that caused this person to die from the cigarette ban that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris passed for crony corporations to benefit from. That seems to be what's going on, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's this fobbing off of responsibility onto the general population of white people, and this is people that, you know, basically ordinary people that go about their lives that aren't out oppressing anybody. They're not bent on oppressing anybody. They're not engaged in oppression, and they have no real, you know, animus towards other people, whatever their skin tone. So I think it's just this kind of you know, it's the substitution for the real culprit of this majority white culture, which is now being, you know, is being vilified like never before. I mean, this is a vilification the likes of which you know, you haven't seen on racial lines since, you know, really since Nazi Germany. I mean, I'm not saying we're headed towards genocide, but we're in a figurative, symbolic genocide of whiteness right now.
And so, and this all comes from this French postmodern theory, right? The theoretical developments.
This comes from critical race theory, which derives from critical theory, which is actually not a postmodernist theory. It's a neo-Marxist theory that derives from the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, whose members came over from Nazi Germany. Actually, they fled Nazi Germany, settled in the United States, and set up shop and started to propound their critical theory, which then has been taken up by race studies and is now turned into critical race theory.
So who are what's the Mount Rushmore for this field of thought? Is there a few names that are kind of?
Yeah, there are a few names, and this is kind of like a pantheon of small figures, really. Critical race theory is headed by, first of all, it was invented as critical legal studies, and it was really about the legal system at first, and that the idea was that the legal system could not function properly to adjudicate cases about race because it was systemically racist itself. So it could not, it couldn't be counted on to deliver justice. So yeah, there's a number of theorists. I'm not real hip on their names because I don't give them much credibility. I think it's a pretty much of a bogus discipline, but you have people like Derek Bell and Alan Freeman and Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, you know, not all black people, by the way. This is something that a number of white theorists are cashing in on as well.
And is the Michel Foucault, is he one of the guys that they pull from some of his ideas? And
they do pull from postmodernism. They pull this idea that race is a social construct, which is possibly true. But when it comes down to it, they see race as really an essential category that really defines everything about a person. That you're white means something particularly about you, that you can't escape that category. There's nothing individual about you that's more than whiteness. And because you're white, you're intrinsically racist. You cannot but be racist. So they claim that all white people are racist regardless of what they think. And even if they deny it, or especially if they deny it, they're racist, because the denial is just proof that you are racist, that you're maintaining a subconscious racism that you don't even acknowledge to yourself.
Do they extend that to albinos in Africa that are hunted by certain communities?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think whiteness is that kind of a characteristic, but it's this abstract thing that people that supposedly have this white skin privilege benefit from, and then that their whole system is set up on the basis of this white skin privilege. And then everything about the society, everything, all actions, every activity that takes place, everything is inflected by and informed and completely dominated by race.
Right.
All of our activities are racial. So everything you've done today is racist. It has a racial component to it. This is true for anybody, according to them.
So it's a kind of neo-Marxist conspiracy theory that wants to make the entire world human history about whiteness. So that's what Neanderthals were dealing with when they were being extinguished by Homo sapiens, was toxic whiteness. Is that the deal? I don't understand.
Exactly. I mean, this is neo-Marxist in the sense that it takes the class struggle and the class antagonism that supposedly obtains in society between the workers and the bourgeoisie or the capitalists, and it puts it in terms of race,
right.
The black versus white.
Let's take a quick break. We're speaking with Michael Rectenwald. He's a former professor, and he's an author of several books revolving around critical race theory. And he's got a new article out on Mises.org that we're going to dive into some more when we continue.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality, grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187, Equal Housing Lender.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa.
Not attorney spokeswoman.
What's better than a stimulus check? Another stimulus check. If you have full coverage insurance, you qualify for up to $150 cash back for your broken windshield. Autoglass America will install a premium quality replacement with a lifetime warranty at no cost to you. Wherever you are, Autoglass America comes to you with free mobile service. Make your money go farther with Autoglass America. 813-96-GLASS. That's 813-96-GLASS. Autoglass America.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski here with Michael Rectenwald as we look at his article on Mises Institute, Mises.org. It's called Vengeance and Sacrifice, Whiteness as Scapegoat in Critical Race Theory and Critical Whiteness Studies. So, Michael, let's kind of set the table here. I like talking about Rene Girard to the Mises Institute folks, and I like talking about it with you. And now it's in a nice, convenient one-stop shop here where you and the Mises Institute teamed up for this article that you wrote. So kind of let's set the table here. We have just a quick little mini segment here before we go to a news break, and then we'll dive into it deep. But just tell folks a little bit about Rene Girard and why he's useful in looking at this critical theory concept.
Yes, well, as you know, Rene Girard basically has a theory of sacrifice, a theory of sacrifice, that there is a basic tendency for vengeance in society, and that sacrifice is a means of stemming vengeance and to basically offer up a surrogate in place of the next victim of vengeance, which would never end, really. If vengeance was constantly sought, it would be an endless cycle of vengeance that would threaten in small societies the society's very existence. So he postulated that, and he rather clearly sets out a really thorough theory that instead of this vengeance being pursued, what societies did, primitive or archaic societies, is they sacrificed surrogates or replacements or substitutions for the next victim of vengeance, and therefore stopped the cycle of vengeance at that point, and it alleviated the society from perpetual violence.
So in our context, again, going back to what I started off with, talking about how Biden wants to expand the war on drugs, but then his administration doesn't want the population to unite, and I guess vengeance in this case, against this bad policy. So he has to try to offer up a surrogate, someone in place, because obviously people don't want to deal with confronting government. They feel like there's nothing they can do, no matter who they vote for. Same drug war continues, same wars continue. They feel like they're powerless. So he says, well, hey, look, don't worry about trying to address the government that creates these bad laws, that create these sometimes violent encounters and oppressive outcomes. Just look at your neighbor, and if he has not repented of whiteness, you can vilify him instead of me. Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Rather than looking at the structures that actually permeate society and allow this kind of kind of violence to go on, for example, as you said, in foreign wars and elsewhere, instead of that, we have a blaming of the nearest and the most helpless persons, those who really can't retaliate.
Right.
And this was key to Girard's theory, is that the victim couldn't retaliate, and he really didn't draw out further vengeance from the community.
We'll hold that thought and continue in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice.
Discussions about things that don't matter while the pandemic, crime, and economic disparity march on. That's why you need a balanced approach to news, business, and entertainment in the state of Florida. That publication is newstalkflorida.com. Whether it's the White House, the courthouse, or your neighbor's house, News Talk Florida has the sources, articles, video, and audio that will be a must daily check-in from your laptop or mobile device. Take a look at newstalkflorida.com. Today's news and entertainment with a Florida.
He's in his elements. President Biden reliving his pre-presidential days as an Amtrak commuter, hopping a train from Philly to Wilmington, Delaware. Mr. Biden is a rail enthusiast, promising it will benefit from his infrastructure proposal, starting with Amtrak's Made in America train cars.
American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products to create American jobs.
The federal mask mandate that requires travelers to wear a face covering, scheduled to expire next month, has been extended until September 13th. TSA also extending face mask requirements at airports, buses, and throughout the transportation network. It's failed so many times, but the White House says it's not giving up and has a new approach to trying to get North Korea to scrap its nuclear weapons. No details so far. A down day on Wall Street, but the major indexes still closed out their best month this year. Investors backed away from technology. And communications companies, the S&P rose over 5% in April. Chuck Sievertson, ABC News.
Neighbor's Choice returns live. I'm David Gronowski, and we're going to dive into this great article by Michael Rectenwald, our guest. It's called Vengeance and Sacrifice, Whiteness as Scapegoat in Critical Race Theory and Critical Whiteness Studies. It's on Mises.org, and it's very good. And I wanted to also give a plug to Michael Rectenwald's works. You can check out his book, Thought Criminal, Beyond Woke, Google Archipelago, and Springtime for Snowflakes as well. So check those out. He's got a host of content online. You can follow him on Twitter. And so let's go back to what you were saying here now. So a good scapegoat has to be a surrogate. So obviously, we saw the image of Joe Biden fist bumping Liz Cheney, and Cheney represents perpetual occupation, primarily of countries with people of color, right? Just like Joe Biden has done his entire life. So that's a reality. That's real. Here I am a person, Liz Cheney, Joe Biden, and I'm going to sign my name. Yes, I want to send troops to occupy people of color overseas. That's what they've done. But they don't want to take responsibility for that violence, the horrible outcomes that come from that, in many of their other policies, domestically as well. And so they say, okay, it's whiteness did it. Whiteness did it.
Right. It's similarly like after the United States invaded Middle Eastern countries and caused the diaspora, the necessary diaspora of Islamic peoples to the United States and elsewhere in Europe, they vilified whites as these Islamophobic people that were just horrible. These horrible Islamophobic people, and it was Islamophobia that was the scapegoat instead of actual criminal activity undertaken by the state in Middle Eastern escapades, which ended in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and many lives dislocated forever.
Right. So it wasn't the French government's fault. It wasn't Hillary Clinton and Obama. They're not the ones that created the modern slave trade in Libya after gutting the country. It's whiteness, or I guess in that case, like you said, Islamophobia that caused that. That they didn't do that, right?
Right. All this goes back to whiteness, because it's only white people or whiteness that has these phobias, that has this racism, that has these horrible traits that have to be sacrificed in order to cleanse the social body of its evils.
So is that their explanation for, like in Japan, when Japan is notorious for being kind of discriminatory sometimes to other races in some of the practices and some of the descriptions and depictions of other races that we've seen? Is that whiteness doing that, or what is that?
Yeah, it's only really since we have a white majority in the United States, I think this is why they are attacking whiteness, because it's a way of using this majority as the scapegoat for all kinds of crimes, and only whites are racist. See, this is endemic to white privilege. It is not extended across the population. We don't look at the history of the world in terms of the kinds of conquests and slave trade that has taken place that have involved other than white people. Only whites are guilty. This is the way of isolating. The scapegoat has to be narrowed down to a certain individual or in this case, an abstraction, a certain idea that has to be sacrificed.
Right. And so this is, but now you said a good scapegoat, a good candidate for sacrifice can't fight back or can't defend itself. But how could that be if whiteness is the
skin color of the majority of the population in America? How are they defenseless in responding?
Well, they're defenseless because they've been put on the defense, and they've been vilified for so long that they have become an abject character in the society. Yeah. Whiteness is abject. It's been thrown out as a deplorable trait, to use an adjective that was applied to some of these same people by the opposition, not by the candidate himself. But this was a deplorable, abject character, set of characters, and that they share this same trait, and this is the evil that is infesting our society. Or white supremacy is now deemed the most dangerous element in American society today, whereas I don't see any signs of it, frankly. I don't see very many ostensible signs that there are legions of white supremacists marching around or otherwise organizing or somehow conspiring to do away with anything but the white race. In fact, I see, the white race being vilified, or whiteness being vilified, as this horrible source of all of our problems. And this is the victim that must be sacrificed in order to stem the violence that would otherwise pervade our society.
Yeah, and that's kind of, you see that there's this desire to kind of forget history, to forget that cultures since the dawn of time have been systemically oppressive or biased or prejudiced in various capacities in various ways. You look at the history of every culture, and there's in groups and out groups, there's preferences, there's stereotypes, there's biases. That's just basic, elementary level understanding of history informs that, but that's not what we get with critical theory. It is a gaslighting attack against history to try to construct a new mythology in which everything centers around white people, which is really a very white supremacist theory, isn't it? It's a very white deifying. If you really think about it, critical race theory is worshiping white people as if they're the primordial god that on which all reality hinges, including mathematics and logic. It's pretty supreme.
They have these superpowers. They have superpowers that enabled them to oppress all these peoples, and they have to have been superior to be able to have done so. Right. But I don't buy that. Of course, I don't buy that supremacy. I think this is a fantasy, and as you put it so well, this is a myth that's put in place of history. This is a mythology that's been put in place of history. It's a cartoon version of history. It's really a myth, and it's a religious myth. It is no less than a religious myth. So we're dealing. And we're always dealing with religion in some sense. We're dealing with a religious creed that has got its own victim, and this victim is to be sacrificed in order to rid the society of all of its ills.
Yeah, and that's what's going on with the current events of our time, is that there's Rene Girard says that the sacrifice in mythology is basically concealing hidden victims, right? Mythology is the heart of systemic oppression, right? Because you're concealing and hiding the voices of victims of real physical pain and bondage and oppression, right?
Exactly. The myth is replacing, just like the sacrificial substitute replaces the real villain. The myth also is a sacrifice of the actual victims to oblivion. Really, it's completely forgetting. It's an act of forgetting of the actual victims in history, and it's a replacement theory that puts up a false, shall we say, a false criminal, a false villain in its place.
Right, and it's not to deny, obviously, that there's been white cultural racism and oppression and bias and stereotypes, and that these things can get baked in subconsciously into certain practices and behaviors. But that the point is, the false mythology is quarantining that human oppression into one particular culture.
as if you can
Right.
quarantine this is only found in this culture and it's only this bad in this culture, which is the myth, right?
Exactly, and that's what the sacrifice has to do. It has to locate everything and limit it to this one character, rather than letting it be what it actually is in the whole society. You're absolutely right. Racism, and there had been systemic racism in the United States. Let's face it. This is undeniable fact. This is historical fact.
Right.
But what we're seeing now is what they're doing is throwing gasoline on the dying embers of racism in order to reignite them for this purpose, and for also, I think, dividing the population and likewise keeping control over them. I think it is a divide and conquer scheme, but it's really racist in itself, and it exacerbates racial tension. It doesn't do anything to solve racism. It actually provokes it, in my opinion.
And really what critical race theory is doing, it really has a problem with Christianity. It's almost like whiteness is a scapegoat for what they really hate, which is Christianity. But you see,
whiteness becomes a scapegoat for Christianity. There's all kind of substitutions going on here.
Because what they really don't like, because if you listen to what they say Shakespeare's a problem, logic's a problem, being on time is a problem, merit is a problem, individual rights are a problem, everything is a problem. All those things are coming from the influence of Judeo-Christianity, not some skin tone thing, right? But they can't go after Christianity directly because their targeted audience they need to win over includes folks who still like Christianity, progressive Christians, right? They've adopted critical theory into their theology. You have large population of Hispanics and blacks. The vast majority of them are Christian. And so if they came out right and said, we got a problem with Christianity, it's time to take on Christianity, you must renounce your faith, that they can't do that. So they have to say, well, let's see, Christianity, that's too touchy right now. Let's hit that on the side, but we're really going to just try to attack whiteness because that will allow people to self-flagellate, because they are 2,000 years in the West of being baked in with Christian concern. When you hear about stories like take out the plank out of your own eye before you judge the speck in your neighbor's eye, right? They are they're hijacking those memes and using that to abuse people. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think you would agree with what I'm about to say too, is that there's another reason they attack. They would really have the victim be Christianity, because Christianity puts an end to this business. It puts an end to this sacrifice. It puts an end to scapegoating.
Right. So that leads me to my conclusion, which is that the best antidote for dealing with this emergent religion is that the real thing, the authentic thing, which is Christianity that they're trying to imitate, needs to come back in full force. Because Christianity, and what I mean by full force is, let's start teaching what it actually means, which is what people like Rene Girard have sketched out, and it needs to be continued, because that's really at the heart of our moment today, is that not enough people understand what Christianity was all about, and those who say they're Christian don't fully practice it. And so there is, see, evil always has to use a half-truth. And it is extremely diabolical that in American history in the 20th century, people who were going to church would go out and then lynch an African-American man and burn him alive and torture him. That is pagan sacrifice in 20th century America. That's a trauma that's extremely powerful, and it does have an effect generationally. That trauma continues. And so critical theory is right to point out that point, right? There's always a truth to these things, but then they twist it and they say, well, the problem is not the human heart. The problem is the folks who were continuing that wicked practice of pagan sacrifice, which happen to be white people. No, all human beings are tempted into this pagan ritual sacrifice behavior, and that's the thing that critical theory doesn't want to address.
and they want to use our resemblance to the real villains, which is another factor in Girard's theory, is that the sacrificial victim must resemble in some way, however remotely, the actual villains involved.
Right.
And so they're using this other half-truth that we resemble, that whites resemble this villain of history.
Right.
And another thing they want to do is continue vengeance. They want to keep vengeance alive. And I think that you're right. Christianity needs to come back without a vengeance. Without a vengeance. And that's the very theme and the very meaning of Christianity.
Right.
Is to live without vengeance.
Wow. That's very powerful. Because it's true. Right now, the right, unfortunately, a lot of it is they're playing right into the hands of the critical theory folks, because they're saying, okay, well, if you want to make everything about identity, okay, we're going to embrace identitarian politics on the right. And if you do that, you're just playing the vengeance game, aren't you?
You're playing the vengeance game, and also you're playing the identity politics game. And I think the right is doing this in another way by throwing up, examples of African Americans that have gone right wing, and they use these people as sort of, shall I say, tokens in order to sort of strike back at the left. Look at this. We've got a number of blacks on our side, and they're very trenchant in their attacks on the left. I think this is just part of the same cycle.
Right. Yeah, it's very, very true. So that's really, a lot of this stuff Nietzsche predicted years ago with Christianity. Remember, and I'm sure you could speak on that. He talked about this rise of the resentment, right? And this idea of this deep loathing, envy, and a victim mentality that would become the new dominant way of dealing with things in the West, because of Christianity undermining the hierarchy and cruelty of the past way of doing things, right? That was locked up in sacrifice.
Right. Yes. Resentment would be the feature of the future for Nietzsche, because the means for dealing with the history was simply to establish this kind of constant envy, this constant resentment. He called it ressentiment, or resentment. It's resentment and envy really combined. That there would be this constant envy, and that's what's being stirred up here. That's what's being constantly activated and churned over and completely, constantly reignited. This idea of envy and resentment, which I don't think in many cases is there. I don't think it's present in many people, but I think it's being stoked on purpose.
Right. Right. So true. That's what Girard called the Antichrist, which is this new collectivist totalitarianism that he saw emerging in the West, in which you would try to bring back the sacrificial violence of the ancient world, but with Christian concern for victims as the myth to wrap around it.
Yeah, isn't that a twist? Yeah, it's very curious. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the rise of leftist totalitarianism. And this is a big feature of it. This is a major feature of it. And it's a way of squelching and stomping down the majority and to belittle them and constantly vilify them in order to pull off the kind of construction of the world that they're attempting to do.
Right. Now, one of the things also that you talk about in the article is that Rene Girard said that, sacrifice doesn't work in the modern world, that we're in a post-sacrificial world. Do you agree with that, or what do you think about that?
No, I sort of differed with it in the article. I think that he suggested that the judicial system, when that comes into play, sacrifice no longer has a role, because we limit vengeance to that particular official, or that official source of vengeance. And therefore it stops the vicious cycle of vengeance. I think because people don't trust the legal system, and sometimes for very good reason, And because it's never perfect, that there is always still a rule for sacrifice, because wherever there's private vengeance, there's always sacrifice as a recourse in order to stem it.
Right. And he suggested that and I think he's right on this. I think you're both right here, because I do think that he a little bit overestimated the defeat of the scapegoating tendency in human beings in the modern world. But I do believe that he's right in the sense that it doesn't create unanimity and it doesn't create, unity anymore, right? In the ancient world, you'd sacrifice somebody, everybody would agree, yeah, that was the villain, and then they write about it later on as Grendel, the monster in Beowulf. Yeah, that was the monster. Right. Everybody agrees, we move on. Now, as we know, nobody can agree on who the villains are. Nobody can agree on who the monsters are. And every time you try to vilify or scapegoat or purge somebody or some person group, it creates schism and it creates more people being sympathetic to them, because it creates kind of a martyr's energy. And Girard saw this as the impact of the cross, undermining totalitarian impulses like what critical theory represents, which it undermines. In their attempt to purge, it will draw more attention and sympathy to the targets of the scapegoating, because the old rules of scapegoating are not quite as powerful as they were prior to Christ.
Yeah, that's right. Christianity diffuses, I should say Christ, the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, it diffuses the scapegoat as a rational, or a rationale, I should say, as a means for dealing with our differences. Right. It becomes overcome, in effect.
Right. And that's what I think what Jesus was saying when he said, I am the stone that the builders rejected, and the stone that the builders rejected became the cornerstone, meaning in the act of being expelled, you will become great. And that's kind of the logic of the time that we're in. People call it the Streisand effect or whatever, where you try to block something out and it draws more curiosity and sympathy towards the topic. And that's, I think, going to be the death knell of critical theory and any kind of totalitarian thing. That doesn't mean that we're going to have easy going. It could get very ugly and very mean, and it is already, but ultimately it will fall apart by its own overexertion of scapegoating, it seems.
Yeah, that's right. It will. It's happening. I see this going on within the circles of the left, and there's a strange epicenter of this is happening at Litchfield College in Portland, where they're scapegoating each other. And there's all kinds of double scapegoating going on, where a black president is accusing a Jewish professor whom he fired of racism, while the Jewish professor is accusing the black president of anti-Semitism. It's just this implosion that's happening, and I see it in a very small scale at this small college outside of Portland in Oregon.
Wow, man, everything's weird is happening in Portland, Oregon, huh? My goodness. So
it's the epicenter.
It's Portlandia.
Yeah,
I guess Portlandia is probably white supremacist by now in the newest rule book update, right? That show.
Yeah, I mean, soon enough you're going to have the Antifa as the white supremacists,
right?
Which in a way they are anyway, because if they believe in this supremacy of whiteness, that it's able to do all these things,
right?
Then they already ascribe to it characteristics that it really doesn't have. They're fetishizing whiteness.
Right.
And it doesn't have the power that they say it does. So therefore, they're the real believers in it.
And you're right, because they have a dying and rising savior myth about their own complexion of skin. It's pathetic. That's what the old mythic God stories were about, a dying and rising savior. You destroy the sacrifice, and then that resolution, that catharsis, that unity that's created by pouring out all the wrath and killing a common victim, a common enemy, that creates such a release of tension that the audience, that the community believes over time that person must have been a savior God rather than just a mischief maker, that they were kind of both, right?
Exactly. So these, it ends up powering the victim. It makes it into something that it wasn't.
So these Antifa people, they believe that they can kind of spiritually and ritualistically die to their whiteness, just like Paul said, die to flesh, die to the sinful flesh nature. They're saying we will die to the whiteness and resurrect into something transcendent
of whiteness that will be allied to the eternal struggle of victims. Sounds like Christianity with violence.
They're encouraged to, and they engage in what they consider the abolition of their own whiteness.
Right.
And they rather fondly call themselves race traders. And this is kind of like you said, it's a reenactment of Christian values in a different register, where they're taking Christianity self-denial and turning it into their own salvation, to placate their voracious appetite for sacrifice.
That's so interesting. Well, I want to ask you, you're a professor, used to be a leftist yourself, and I want to ask you, what do you think is the intellectual vanguard for how we combat intellectually these bad ideas by providing, a better intellectual foundation of discourse that can help really influence and change the scholarship that goes on in this country as it relates to, whether critical theory has got it right about oppression and violence, or maybe mimetic theory by Rene Girard should be looked at more,
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you've won me over to the Girard camp, and seeing this as one of the cornerstones of a kind of intellectual vanguard that can actually debate and overcome this kind of craziness, this hysterical anti-intellectualism that is reigning in our society.
That's awesome to hear that. Do you think we need to be, how do we get this conversation going, this debate? Is it going to happen in universities, or are we going to have to create online courses like our friend James Lindsay does, these intellectual courses online?
Yeah, I'm creating my own online courses with another institution. I've just started as the chief academic officer, and we're going to be doing this. But I think what I'm continuing to do, even though I'm not in the academy, is I keep inserting my articles to the academy, and they're being read. They're being read by a lot of academics. In fact, I'm an ex-academic who's probably well read by more people than most of the academics that are still in that.
Well, that's fantastic. You're more well-read than a lot. That's awesome to hear. Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. It's always great hearing from you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's great to talk to you.
Very fruitful discussion. I enjoyed it, and I know our audience did. Hey, it's the end of the show today, folks. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. If you want to watch this episode again or listen to it on demand, go to our website, aneighborschoice.com. That's aneighborschoice.com. And you'll see this posted, as well as the other discussions we've had this week and beyond. You don't want to miss it. Go to aneighborschoice.com. But for now, Godspeed.